Good afternoon, distinguished guests and fellow colleagues from Singapore and audiences from around the world. Welcome to the Center for Liveable Cities lecture series. Thank you for joining us today. I am Deng Mao, researcher from CLC, and I'm honored to be the MC for this afternoon. The CLC lecture series is one of the platforms through which urban thought leaders share best practices and exchange ideas and experiences. Today, we are delighted to have with us two senior experts from Ramboll, Global Design Director Dr. Hossein Rezai and Managing Director for Buildings, Mr. Søren Brøndum. Ramboll is an engineering, architecture, and consultancy company founded in Denmark and operating across 35 countries. Today's lecture is part of the knowledge collaboration between CLC and Ramboll under the Memorandum of Understanding signed recently at the COP28 conference in Dubai. The objective of this collaboration is to advance regenerative thinking for cities and built environment. Given this context, today's lecture titled Creating a Regenerative City will explore the transformative power of regenerative design in shaping sustainable, resilient, and thriving urban spaces. Without further ado, I would now like to invite our first expert speaker, Dr. Hossein Rezai, to introduce the concept of regenerative design, the evolution of its thinking process, and why it may hold the key to develop our cities for a better future. The floor is yours, Dr. Hossein.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good morning from a very cold and freezing Europe. Thank you for that introduction. In the next 20-25 minutes, I will present in about 7 nuggets of about 3 or 4 minutes each, some of the work that we've been doing within the team in Ramboll on regenerative thinking, regenerative worldview, under the title of degeneration and regeneration and anatomy. I try to change my slide. It's not changing. Maybe I stop sharing and share again. Yes. Before that, a very short prelude, context within which we are here gathered today to talk about regeneration. The story of our relationship with the environment is really a story of 2 halves. The graph that you have all seen, the context that you're all familiar with, in this case, parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It's been going up forever, for a very, very long time. This graph goes back to 1960s. In the same period, we had our first World Climate Conference in 1979. First IPCC assessment report was issued in 1990. First UN Climate Change Conference in 1995. Kyoto Protocol, Copenhagen Accord, of course, the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degrees. And since then, we've had COPs 26, 27, 28. There's a lot of good efforts, as you can see, and you, I'm sure, have all been part of these efforts in order to reduce and to bend this curve and push the curve downwards. But somehow, the efforts and the achievements don't seem to have gone together. The parts per million, for instance, in this case, is going up exponentially. The question that arises is like, why are our efforts not good enough to achieve the targets that we want to do? And the same story is true about all other environmental indicators. The ones that we want to go down, like carbon, they're going up. The ones that we want to go up, like biodiversity, are going down. Now, we sit now at a crossroad. We have a choice. of either continuing along the same path that we have been doing, continue to have another COP, another set of efforts, etc., along the same lines. Now, what has happened along the same lines, using now the total greenhouse gas emissions, again, another graph that you're all familiar with, is the total greenhouse gas emissions currently hovers around 50 gigatons. There is a path, the current path that we have, either some of us, hopefully not many, who say we have no problem, we don't need the solutions. That's the path of the deniers. We can continue along those lines. The projections are 4.1 to 4.8 degrees temperature rise, which are disastrous, as we all know. The other path is to try and be less bad, the path of sustainability, and try and do a little bit better, do less harm. And with the most optimistic policies, again, the temperature rises compared to the time of first industrial revolution is about 2.9 degrees. If we continue along these two paths, the projections are the construction waste in 2025 is going to be 1.1 billion tons every year. We can continue to demolish apparently, evidently serviceable and safe buildings, and the environmental impact of which is the same as setting fires to forests. The global chemical usage is projected to be doubled between now and 2019 and 2030, about 40% of which are harmful chemicals. Now, there is an alternative. And that alternative is the thing that we've gathered today to talk about. And that is the one that really bends this curve and brings it towards the 1.5 degrees projections that we want. And that is the path of regeneration. And that is what we want to push for and to promote within our practices. Now, the journey of regenerative thinking, regenerative design within the built environment, design and built environment, is a very, very brief history of it, is what I call from the horizontal to the vertical. A lot of you know that a gentleman called Bill Reed, just under 20 years ago, drew a horizontal line and then divided it into 5 segments. And from the left to right, called it conventional, business as usual, and then green and sustainable, restorative, regenerative. The words may not have been exactly the same, but basically from the left to right, we're doing things somewhat better than we used to. He then magically drew this diagonal line and came up with this most iconic representation for regenerative design and regenerative thinking. The most talks and books and documents on regenerative design and thinking has a version of this diagram. Now, over the past 20 years, more recently, 10 and even less 5 years, certain amendments and edits have been proposed. One of them is from degeneration on the past, on the left, to the regeneration, top right hand. One of them is that the horizontal line needs to really move up. If sustainability is the effort that we have all been put in, the best of sustainability is really zero harm. So the horizontal line really needs to move on so that sustainability is actually at the bottom of the line. Further evolution of it defines these areas as spheres: sustainability sphere, regenerative sphere on the right. Time frames are added within the past 100 years. We've generally been either business as usual or sustainability towards 2020. Now we're doing a lot of sustainability. Most of us, our best efforts, but some of us are doing some regenerative thinking and regenerative designs. And the idea is that sometime by 2030, hopefully, a lot of our efforts, if not all of it, will be on regenerative curve. The curves, however, are like this, and there is an argument that there is a gap between the two worlds, that if you do more and more and more and more sustainability, you don't automatically get to regeneration. that at some stage we need to shift this paradigm and we need to jump the curve from the curve of sustainability to curve of regeneration. And the two curves presented like so. On the one curve on the left, conventional materials, fossil fuel, and traditional design methods, sort of basic design ambitions, etc., mono-species interest. And at the very best, really, we are optimizing, we are trying to be less bad, which is the mantra of sustainability. Whereas on the right curve, the curve on the right, we're talking about new materials and composites, renewable energy plays a very big part, and quite a lot of other new concepts, multi-species interests of the unborn. And really that is the path to 1.5 degrees. The one on the right are the lexicon of regeneration, regenerative thinking. The ones on the left are the lexicons that we have been using so far on the business as usual and sustainability. So there is a vertical line which separates these two, and hence the title of this part of the talk, from the horizontal line of Bill Reed to the vertical line, or if you like, from Reed to Ramboll. That's a little bit of a brief history of movements on this front. Now, just one of these concepts, like multiplicity of clients, on the right, just a couple of graphs to describe it as using one project, one of my favorite projects, the Pompidou Center. You see, what we say, what was the concept of multiplicity of clients is that in usual terms, business as usual, and even within our sustainability environment, we usually have a site, a client, and a brief, and then we have contractual duties to the client, as well as a duty of care to help him achieve his ambition. Most of us stop there, and as long as we achieve those, we think that we have been professional and we've discharged our duties. The multiplicity of clients says that the streets are our clients. We have a duty of care to the streets to make sure that the streets are better after we've done the project compared to before. The neighborhood is our client. We need to elevate the whole of the neighborhood with the projects that we do. On top of that, the grid of the city is our clients. If there's a precinct district that we have control over and the grid of the city has been broken, then we have a duty to repair it, to make it better. The whole city is our client, if you like the Bilbao effect, even with one project, sometimes we can elevate the whole project. The country is our client. We have a duty of care to the country in which we work. And of course, bigger pictures, the planet. So when we say we care about the environment, we should treat the interest of the planet as we do the interest of the paying clients. From the planet all the way to the trees around the sites are our clients. The birds that make nests on those trees are our clients, all the way from the planet to the ladybird that might live on the site. So when we say we care about the biodiversity, the ladybird is our client. We have a duty of care to it. So you can see in here, 9 of these 10 clients are repeat clients. They apply to almost every project. Only one client, the paying client, the contractual client, whom we value a lot, of course, it varies from one project to another. And with this frame of mind, I think our approach may be a little bit different to the business as usual or to the sustainability approach to our relationship with our clients and our sites. Now, how do we do regeneration? I think I'm just touching on the surface, given the time that we have and in the way of introduction. We think that what the emerging picture is that regenerative design is what it says it is. It's a design discipline. It's a way of designing. And it's got its drivers that I'll talk to you about a bit later. And the big how is, if you take the decline in biodiversity as a driver, again, I'm sure a lot of you know that the global loss has been since the 1970s, and this graph comes only up to 2016, is about 68% loss. Of course, this is a degeneration. So a regenerative approach to loss of biodiversity, say to a site, for instance, is to push back on this graph and go back to a better past. In this case, we go back to the 1980s and say that I want to regenerate the biodiversity on this site or this precinct to what it was in 1980s by a time in the future, say in this case by 2025. Now, if that is the red path to now is degeneration, the regeneration is to regenerate it back. And that is sort of the essence of regeneration, making things better. Now, if someone wants to do it faster, I have actually no problem with it. Those are also regenerations. Now, just the degeneration and regeneration cycle in the case of existing buildings, which is a very subject which is very close to all our hearts, I'm sure, is that the same thing applies. You see, existing buildings from the top left-hand corner gradually over time degenerate, like most of us. Right? There are things that we can't do now that we could do before. So as these guys degenerate down to a minimum acceptable level, as this curve comes down, then we retrofit them. The act of retrofit is an act of regeneration, and that act can continue to in perpetuity almost. So we can continuously retain our buildings, which is one of the tenets of regeneration. And a very successful example in the context of Singapore is the leadership that URA and the ministries show to retain this gem of a building, which is part of the heritage of Singapore. Now, I gave you the example using loss of biodiversity, but the thing about regenerative thinking is that it needs to embrace complexity. One of the reasons why we have not succeeded is not that we have not put a lot of effort, as you saw in the graph, and as you know, we have put a lot of effort. A lot of very clever people have come up with solutions. But sometimes we have been looking for simple answers. And what we've now realized is that, of course, our relationship with the environment is a complex relationship, and complex problems and challenges do not have simple answers. So we need to embrace complexity rather than try to break complexity into simple components. And when we look at complexity, we see that, yes, the design drivers of regenerative thinking has water in it. The way we deal with water is a design driver in a regenerative environment. Vegetation is a design driver. Not so much manicured landscape, but perhaps rewilding and integration with nature. Air and carbon, of course, they're important, but not the carbon, the myopic view of carbon that some of us may have. Biodiversity is a design driver, and we need to do what that graph that I showed you with biodiversity to enhance it. We need to do it with all of these plus more. On this graph, you see, on this slide, you see 16. Collaboration is a design driver in a regenerative environment. Sound is a design driver, etc., etc. And in fact, there are 16 in here, but there are more that we've been discussing within Ramboll, and there are other things: waste, soil, massing and fragmentation. All of these should be used as design drivers. And maybe there are 32 or maybe even more. The work is in progress. But for every project, one of the things that we do with regenerative design chart, a tool that we've come up with, that in the course later today and in the course of tomorrow, a lot more you'll hear about it, is that like we take, say, 16 of these drivers, which are more relevant to a particular brief or to a particular project, in this case, this 16, and then we have a look at opportunities, call it the opportunity matrix. Opportunities that exist to enhance these drivers on a particular site or a project, and we rank them from 1 to 10, 10 being high opportunities, 1 being low opportunities. And a graph like this, a tool like this, becomes our driver throughout the project. A case study, just a quick one to show how it can be applied. We call it regenerativeness scale or Ramboll opportunity matrix. And very, very quickly, I'm running out of time. Kampong Admiralty, a lot of you know the project, very close to all our hearts. The project, mixed development, residential, etc., etc. So what we do is we choose the drivers, in this case, vegetation, biodiversity, etc., etc. And each of them, we expand on what is happening with the vegetation, is community farming, tropical plants, on biodiversity, on waste, the aspects that exist on the project, and including other drivers, air and carbon collaboration, etc. So there's a dialogue evolves on the project, and each of these heading and subsettings become part of our design drivers, if you like, and then we apply it to the regenerative chart. In this case, of course, the project ranks very highly. This is, of course, the chart applied to a project which is already complete. And towards the end, one of the things that we spend a lot of time within Ramboll is, of course, advocacy, what we're doing now, sharing our ideas, developing thoughts and ideas, and then agency, getting together and trying to do things. But we appreciate that at the end of the day, what we will be judged with is the acts that the actions that we take. So while we are in favor of complexity of thoughts, we think that eventually the actions and commitments must be simple and verifiable and actionable. And I'll share with you 3 of them that we're doing and we have developed within Ramboll. Commitment 1, all existing buildings have the right to be heard and retained. So we are committing to compiling a visual inspection report for all existing buildings on all our projects. I think we should change this modus operandi where you must make a case to retain an existing building, otherwise you can demolish it. It must be the other way around, that all existing buildings must be retained unless we make a case for demolishing them. Commitment 2 is on carbon, of course, that no buildings will have an embodied carbon more than 150 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square meters. There's a lot of debate around it. And of course, the number of 150 is applicable to a specific case and a specific part of the life cycle. We've developed matrices for different types of buildings, different heights in different locations, etc. And something that we have less developed, but we are making these commitments, developing it, is that we will not double our chemical footprint leading up to 2030. I don't see why we should double. We can just remain as bad as we are. Why should we be twice as bad? But these are the actionable commitments that are happening within Ramboll, and we're discussing them sort of on a daily basis. And the last slide about publication recommendations. Within the Design Excellence Board, that both myself and Søren, plus a few other of our colleagues are members of, we have publications. In 2023, we had 7 publications, 6 periodicals, which came out every 4 to 6 weeks, and 1 Ramboll book, which came out in October. The periodicals are available online, and everybody can have access to it. And number 4, on regenerative worldview, is something that has got some of the ideas that I mentioned today and a little bit more. Thank you. I'm done.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Dr. Hossein. Thank you for the thought-provoking sharing on the origin and philosophy of regenerative design thinking, as well as why paradigm shift is required. So for the second presentation, we would like to invite Mr. Søren Brøndum, Managing Director for Buildings at Ramboll. Søren was responsible for some of the Ramboll's largest multidisciplinary and most complex infrastructure and building projects during his over 30 years service at Ramboll. And from CLC, we are also glad to have Søren as a member to our inaugural WCS Knowledge Council. So next, Søren will share about how Ramboll interprets and incorporates regenerative design principles and the corresponding design and technical innovations. Now the floor is yours, Søren.
Thank you, Deng Mao. I will try to share my screen here. Let me see. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the time to share some thoughts here. As Dr. Hossein described nicely, regenerative design goes beyond sustainability and aims to create a positive impact on environment and society rather than just minimizing harm. I will in my presentation go through some of the regenerative design principles we use in Ramboll and a couple of tools we have developed. So in our effort to solve the climate crisis, it's important. Let's just see if I can. It's important not to get carbon tunnel vision as shown on this graph. There's a lot more to this than just carbon, as Hossein also pointed out. Probably the biodiversity crisis is even more urgent to solve, as also shown on this illustration here. The wave is coming, and as Hossein explained, over the last 50 years, 70% of our species has disappeared. It's a bit of a disaster, and that's the biodiversity crisis is very much part of what we're trying to solve. And as we know, it's in the urban areas which drive out nature. And one important thing, our principle is that we see city as a living system where we have to solve everything in combination. You can't solve things in silos. So all the different elements of a city has to be solved together. And we always try to focus on leaving sites in a better state than it was before. So our three guiding principles for doing regenerative design in Ramboll consist on three elements: nature as a partner, future generation, and everything as a nutrient. I'll go to each of them to explain. Nature as a partner. So nature as a partner means embracing nature as a source of inspiration, a guide and a key stakeholder. We need to shift from a conceptual shift from the left, where we depart from the conventional sustainable development paradigm, where competing interests from business and society, nature align as a sweet spot for sustainable development. We need to shift to the right here, where nature really is a stakeholder. We need to adopt a holistic mindset that place nature as the overarching framework encompassing all life, society, and the global economy. This paradigm shift establishes a hierarchy of interconnected impact rather than conflicting interests, where we place nature as the most important stakeholder when we do our projects. This was nature as a part, and then future generation. That means having foresight of the implication of design decisions and how they will affect the local context of society beyond the project. It involves respecting planetary boundaries, building resilience, and embedding negative, adaptive, and transforming capacities. You see some of the stakeholders here. It's about having a long-term thinking, like a maybe 300 years lifespan. From imagine your kind of grandparents, parents, in which kind of world did they live, then move your imagination to go to your world and further to your grandchildren's children. Which kind of world will they live? This is a generational thinking needed for regeneration. And finally, the third principle we use is everything as a nutrient. Everything as a nutrient means moving away from a linear, wasteful, and generative process to a circular one, improving resource efficiency and producing environmental gain. It involves making conscious choices, rethinking waste as a resource, and finding interconnection for coexistence and ongoing net positive impacts. So Ramboll is committing to applying these principles in our projects and services across different markets and disciplines. We have developed some tools and platforms to support the learning, as Hossein already described. We have developed two tools to support the projects. We have a regenerative chart tools, and we have a regenerative design thinking tool, the one shown in the middle here. And the regenerative chart tool, Hossein already explains, allows user to examine a project through a list of a perspective, from conventional to regenerative. We measure them from 1 to 5 in a spectrum to measure project scope, where 1 is conventional and 5 is regenerative. And the tool champion the 3 generative design principle I just described. The tool also emphasizes learning, recording project progress, and decision in a database for future reference. Then we have also developed a regenerative design thinking tool, and it helps to target projects to do more good via open questions that help you discuss, innovate, and tailor a project's ambition beyond standard project brief. It's kind of a tool you use in the beginning of a project. The tool enables a user to search and select a series of questions they like to implement into the project, questions from a larger register of questions inspired with regenerative themes. And all the projects are again stored in the database, so you can use it for future projects. It's most forceful to use the tool in the negotiation and planning phase of the project. I know you will go through these tools in more depth tomorrow in your workshop, and I hope you get something out of it. As a private company, we can, of course, do a lot to change the path we are on. But as I also advocated for in former presentation, we need also the right policy to support the journey. When it comes to biodiversity, we see this year a lot of new regulation here in Europe that will drive change in. We see we have the European Green Deal, we have EU taxonomy, we have a EU biodiversity strategy, and we have a EU natural restoration law. They all drive demand for changes both mandatory and voluntary. Then we also have sector-specific guidance, who also drive change. For example, from UK legislation, where we have a biodiversity net gain defined, and it defined as a development that leaves nature in a measurable better state than before. This is also something Paul Astle will go more in depth with tomorrow in his presentation in the workshop. Another illustrative way at looking at what we should do on an urban scale is to look at the urban material pyramid. In a former presentation, I introduced the building material pyramid, the one in the middle here, that illustrated that we need to use more biogene material and less concrete, steel, and other carbon-intensive material with a lot of embodied carbon. On an urban scale, we need to use most in the bottom, like transform existing buildings, like Hossein also mentioned. Instead of tearing them down, we need to plan our cities with nature as a partner and have low carbon intensive ability and so forth. It could also be illustrated like this. In the Western world, especially, we see the normal triangle to the left, and we need to turn it upside down. And in the order, we need to maximize use of existing building. We need to renovate them. We need to transform, and then we maybe need to do some new build, but less as of today. I'll now show you a few project cases where we have used some of the principles I've just been through. The first example is the Wiki campus in Helsinki. The Wiki campus is being developed to be the most sustainable campus on Earth. High ambitions. The campus is known to be an agricultural site in the middle of the city, and it wants to embrace that in the future as well, and also develop the campus as a living lab. We have followed the project with the chart tool I just presented. You can see it here to the right. Under different parameters, it has been assessed. And we have used the thinking tool to expand and truly make a difference by responding to creation leading questions. The project has developed a playbook for city planners in different levels to help to regenerate and design a campus based off a light-centered approach. Another example from Denmark, in the city of Aarhus. An old municipality hospital has now gone through a sensitive renovation and transformation and formed the basis of a new part of the city with more than 110,000 square meters, maybe one of the most ambitious and important transformation projects in Denmark right now. And, comparing these very old buildings, more than 100 years old, instead of tearing them down, we're reusing them and, of course, saving a lot of CO2s, materials, and also, journeys with trucks to the city. Another example here from Toronto district. I will not go into the detail. I know you will go through this in more detail tomorrow, but it's a neighborhood in Toronto where there's a combined focus on people, place, and nature. The plan will convert a former airbase into a residential and transit hub with affordable housing and transform existing buildings into residential buildings. And the final example I will mention is from Copenhagen again. It's the North Harbor development. It's developed as a livable city to smart and sustainable solution. It's also called the 5-minute city, as there's nowhere in the city where you have more than 5 minutes to grocery shop, public transport, etc. Some of the central part of the projects are existing industrial buildings and warehouse in the city's area is transformed into residential buildings. Carbon neutral means using low carbon materials and also using renewable energy for supplying the city. The smart city solution that incentivize smart behavior and also use two-way communication with the energy grid. District cooling and district heating is used throughout the city. And all in all, it's a city, the area where we're trying to use as much as we can from the regenerative design principle. And I think the project is actually very much in line with the project you also trying to develop in your Lake District. I think you will go through that in your session tomorrow. And here's just a view of how the area looked some years back and how it developed over the years. Is a photo, and it's a city area that will develop over the next 20 years. So coming to an end with the illustration of a city development, we strive to deliver on all three principles in everything we do, and by considering the three principles I went through, I think we can do more good, and we will do our best to follow this principle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Søren, for the very insightful and practice-oriented presentation. I'm sure the two insightful presentations, which are very complementary, will prompt quite a lot of questions from the audience today, among which many are actually design professionals and experts in public and private sectors. So now I would like to invite Dr. Hossein, Søren, and our moderator for this session, Elaine Dan, Director for Research at the CLC, to join us for our moderated Q&A session. Elaine oversees CLC's research in the areas of climate change, resilience, aging, and health. She was also formerly Director of Strategic Research and Director of Architecture and Urban Design Excellence at the Urban Redevelopment Authority, URA of Singapore. For the audiences, if you would like to ask a question, please type into the Q&A panel, and we also welcome audiences to upvote the questions for the attention of our experts. I will now hand over the floor to Elaine, please.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our session today. Glad that you all could join us at the start of the year. And thank you very much to Hossein and to Søren for sharing with us today their thoughts of what regenerative thinking is. Maybe before we start asking the questions, and I'd like to encourage our audiences to put in your questions. So far we have a couple, and we'd like to encourage you to continue to post your questions. I'd just like to make a quick comment or summary just to capture what we have heard from Hossein and Søren today. I think I have to start with the premise to say that the whole conversation on regenerative design, it is not so much a set of principles or KPIs. I think by now we will have understand from Hossein's and Søren's presentation, there's actually a mindset shift. And that mindset shift is necessary. And this is the start of our journey to come together to discuss, converge those thoughts towards a common understanding of what regenerative design is. I think maybe in Hossein's presentation, it was a very good beginning to share with us what were the genesis of the idea of regenerative design, going back all the way to over 20 years ago in that graph that you have shared. And to see that there are what we call opportunity matrices and regenerative scale. So we have to bear in mind that it's not, is this regenerative, is this not? But it is a whole spectrum of what's happening. And I really appreciated what Hossein said, that regen is a mindset. And I think these points were also echoed again by Søren. And I think with Søren has given us some hints and a definition of what he thought regenerative thinking is. And very importantly, he mentioned something about ecocentric approach to design. And in the heart of it is been looking at nature looking at nature positivity beyond just climate positivity and low carbon. And very interestingly, to see nature as a stakeholder in this. And I think in that itself, Søren also shared with us some of the key work that Ramboll has done, and which explains why we are working closely with Ramboll on this conversation. Thoughts about a possible toolbox, a design chart, or even design thinking tools. And I think what Søren also shared with us is the two pyramids, a pyramid and an inverted pyramid, and things like urban material pyramid, and how do you think about the things you need to have most in a city that has encompasses the idea of regenerative design thinking. And I think in it all, there's something very important for us to learn, which is the idea about maximization, the building, which is also the commitment number one that Hossein spoke about, which is about the buildings that we should be keeping, and where possible, to innovate and to repurpose them. So, I mean, with those in mind, I thought maybe we could start with some of the conversations here and the questions. Søren and Hossein, I'm supposing you could see the questions online as well. Yeah. So I thought there was a very good question by, if you can't see it yet, while you're putting it on, I will just maybe call out the first question by Adam Roberts. And this is a very good question to begin with. And he says, I feel that regenerative design has been around for a bit of time, but it is not widely known to the general public yet. How do you think we can promote regenerative design to the public and differentiate it from other concepts? So maybe a few minutes to think about that. And then maybe one of you would like to begin first. So we have to repeat. How?
Søren.
Yeah, you got a
Sorry,
question.
so do you want me to go? Sorry.
Yeah, just go. Go, Hossein.
I think this is the question, do you say by John?
I see it by Adam Roberts at
Oh,
three.
Adam
Roberts.
sorry,
Yes,
Adam
Adam
Roberts.
Roberts.
Yeah, I think the question is a very apt one. In fact, the whole idea of regeneration, we borrowed it from agriculture. It's been there for many, many decades, regenerative agriculture. It is sort of new. Bill Reed's horizontal line was drawn in, I think, 2007, or was published then. So it is new in the built environment and in the design of the built environment. And we've made a lot of progress in a relatively short period of 17 or so years. He's right. I think we need to do a lot more. The whole that triple A's of advocacy, agency, and activism. We need to do a lot more advocacy for the topic. We need to publish more. We need to have more of these sessions as we have, and I think it is happening. And we hope that the 350 or so people who are online will also help the agency and spread the good word.
Thank you, Hossein. That's a good point there. I think it's a lot about building the mind share. And I think in that you're also talking about the capability development, building and training that we need to get everybody to shift.
Well, I think, yes, I agree to Hossein's remark on this. And I think, the Urban Lab proposal here, ending with a World City Summit where you will also have some engaging, discussion around it. I think that is great, and World City Summit is a well-known and very big event, and by promoting it there, it will get further out. You could say that we discussed it also before we started the session here. Maybe we in Ramboll has been a little bit cautious to go out and say we're doing regenerative design, because we are actually not doing that. So because we don't want to be accused for greenwashing. So we wanted kind of to have developed a little bit, but I think, the principles and that we should do it, we should promote more. Then we cannot say that we have fully regenerative projects, but still we should promote the whole thought and mindset shifts that Hossein also advocated for.
That's a good point. Thank you, Søren, for reiterating that point, because right now what we're saying is that this is a concept that we are trying to translate into our built environment. And so there is, as we mentioned earlier in some of our sessions, we're saying there's no one project that truly embodies regenerative. You can't say it is, but there definitely are principles that we can draw from, and to have that mindset and that lens when we look at the projects and work that we are doing. I'd like to bring our point to the next question here. And this is an interesting question about this person had chosen to remain anonymous, but talking about the regenerative approach to buildings in a high density context like Singapore. And that's the last question at 3:21 p.m. Here, the latest one that we see. Now they say, some argue that constructing new buildings generate a lot of carbon, but these buildings can also be much more efficient in the long term. And also, he is saying that the cost of maintaining and upgrading buildings can also be costly. So when we look at a high density environment like Singapore, we are also trying to maximize the land use by increasing the density. And so it is inevitable that you may have to demolish and rebuild. And the maximization, like what you have shared in your slides, Søren, may not be possible at times. So they're asking, both of you, do you have any views on this dilemma that we have right now?
For sure. I mean, I think it's a good point. I mean, it could be very costly to renovate an old building to new standard. Maybe it uses a lot of energy. Maybe the ventilation system, the air conditioning system is very, using a lot of energy. So, and the facade is maybe not efficient anymore, and so they could be very costly and also very carbon intensive to renovate it. But this is exactly the kind of exercise you have to go through, as Hossein described. You have to kind of do a small exercise to see what is more effective, seen from a carbon perspective, from a resource perspective, and from some of these parameters that we showed in the presentation. And today, I think it's very much driven by finance. What is most financial viable? We need to kind of have carbon and other, of these elements as a currency we also need to look at.
That's a good point. I think that's the reason why tomorrow at our Urban Lab workshop, we do have friends from the industry and from the finance sectors that will be joining us, and maybe we could hear a little more from them. Yes, Hossein?
Yes, I think Søren's beautiful last sentence really says it all. One of the drivers that we have identified as part of regenerative design driver is economy. We're saying, the value system that we have, what we measure as cost and what we ignore. Currently, our numbers are highly incomplete. In the previous shift or the current phase of mind that we are, cost of development doesn't account for a lot of other costly damages that we are inflicting on the environment, for instance. I'm sure you have seen there was a report saying that of the most, at least 3 or 4 most profitable international global companies in the world, none of them would even survive if the total cost of damage to the environment was in their accounts and they had to pay for it. So that itself is a shift in mind that we need to do. If we account for all the costs, then it would be seen that retaining existing buildings, enhancing them, retrofitting them may not be as costly relative to a new build as we currently have. So that holistic view of what cost is an important one. And of course, then developing the techniques and the expertise to deal with existing buildings makes us, I think, more economically then enhance them so that they don't necessarily cost more than adding a new building. Now, we're not against new buildings. We do a lot of them. We do about 10 million square meters of them per year, right? Søren, within
Yeah.
Ramboll, the 18,000 of us. But the shift in mind is that we keep existing buildings unless we can make a case for not keeping it, not the other way around.
And that's exactly the mindset shift that we're talking about, because for the longest time, we've always been adopting the very purpose-built frame of mind, that tunnel vision that we spoke about, which is this aligned to my purpose? If it's not, then let's pull down and have a new one. And that would be grossly misjudged going forward. And I think the answers that you have given does answer some of the other questions we have here, which we're also asking about that question about demolition versus new build. And I think for our audience there, I hope that has answered your questions, because there were a couple of questions that were similar. So I hope that answered that category of questions. And actually on that note, that now that we're talking about those pathways, then there's this good question here that will be a good segue. And this question, if I can read it out at 3:25 p.m. Is it a prerequisite or advantage for driving regenerative design that buildings or cities have achieved zero through the degenerative pathway? Are there opportunities for leapfrogging forward? And if so, what are these opportunities? So what is the prerequisite or advantages we could see for driving regen design so that and are there opportunities for leapfrogging what we already, from where we are right now? I think this is a tough question here.
I think so. Well, from my point of view, I think so. I think we are as we've sort of discussed here, with some level of humility, that we still don't have a lot of regenerative projects done. Nobody else has, as Søren said at COP as well. So we are exercising that sense of humility, that we are beginning to apply these things within the industry, these principles. And because we haven't done a lot, there are a lot of opportunities for leapfrogging. In fact, there is. We need to. One of the things that we're doing within Ramboll is to be thinking that every project must have an ecologist on it, and we have quite a lot of good ecologists within our environment and health discipline, and we're saying that we should have them. I think if we get collectively work transdiscipline and across disciplines, then we can leapfrog. If we stay within our own pillars, that I'm an engineer and you're an architect and you're whatever, then it becomes difficult to leapfrog. But once we collect together and work not collaborative necessarily, not multidiscipline, but transdiscipline, where the ecologist comes up with a master plan, for instance, and then we work with it, then it is possible to leapfrog. Yes.
Any thoughts about that, Søren?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it also in the presentation. I think the earlier you get in to the project, the better chance you have for leapfrogging, because it's really in the planning of a city area that you can do something. Once you have established the city plan and you're coming to the specific buildings that you have decided you want a building here, there's not so many opportunities to really leapfrog. You can try to use less material and things like that, but really, the biodiversity agenda has to be solved on the city area level. So the earlier, the better. I think, for example, what I also mentioned, the policy that has now been introduced in several countries in Europe, the biodiversity net gain you have to show before you actually do the project is very positive, because, and I've said it before in presentations. I think we really need regulation. I don't think the market can do it itself. We need regulation so the private company compete on level ground. You could
Level
say.
playing field, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Then we of course need to account for that it doesn't get so costly that people can't afford to live in the buildings we do. So it's only the rich that can live there. So there is also a part of this regenerative design thing. There are also some equality measurements we need to think of.
That's
So,
a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Søren, because in your presentation, you did share with us some of the policies in the EU. For instance, you spoke about the EU Green Deal, about the regulations and the reporting standards that have already been mentioned in place. And also you talk about the taxonomy of building materials, for instance, and that itself is about the community or the industry coming together voluntarily to do disclosures, and things like that do help with leveling the playing field for all, so that we are also able to be making the right investments in the right areas for more impact. And actually that leads to one of the questions we have, and I think it could, I'm just wondering if you all would like to elaborate on this point, now that we're on that topic of policies and governance. And this question by Alina Fournier-Cahy, which policies are essential for promoting and implementing principles of regenerative urban design? I think you have shared some, but I'm just wondering any further thoughts you have on some possible policies. Should there be something that we should put ecocentricity in the middle of this conversation? Are there ways where we should be incentivizing certain developments and thinking? Maybe you would like to share your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I think we need this regulation. So in Denmark, for example, we have it already on carbon. You know, we need to do life cycle assessment calculations. So it's not only, you know, the body carbon, but also the operational carbon. You have to do a full life cycle assessment. But that's only about carbon. Now we're introducing this biodiversity net gain thing, which is important because so we don't get, you know, tunnel vision, only focus on carbon. And also the other element also mentioned by Hossein, water, noise, all these kind of things has to go into the regulation in kind of a holistic way. And I think you have actually some of these regulation also in Singapore, and I guess you're also working on that still. So was that the questions? I think, you know, what the finance, maybe back to the finance. I think, you know, finance, we know that this is really driving a lot of behavior. So we see now that the green bond and the regulation in EU will support that building greener, you know, built environment will get cheaper, you know, loan. So in a way you pay for doing it less green, you could say. So in a way you get that this will be a new currency. So I think we really have to look at the finance impact, and that's still new, very new. How do we do that, and also how do we do it in a way so it's not only the rich that can pay for the buildings, so to speak? How do we do it in a social good way?
Right, good point.
I think that's
Hossein?
important.
Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with Søren, and he covered the topic. You know, in terms of regulations, I would say if you take some good project examples of what we can do now, things like Woha's Kampung Admiralty, for instance. And if we can then think of policies that encourages this sort of projects more and better, and in fact, it's working backwards from an example that has worked. I have used Woha's Oasia hotel project, for instance. It's got a green plot ratio of 11 or something. So it has actually greened not only its own site, but 11 other sites in the neighborhood. So if you had every other 11 buildings in Singapore was like that, the whole country would be green in terms of that one driver of greening. So if we can now have policies that encourages those sort of projects, then you know, maybe that would be one example. The other thing would be to take an agreed set of drivers. We have proposed the 16 or 32 or any is work in progress that is in our regenerativeness tool. And then we say, let's think of policies which encourages these sort of drivers to become design drivers in for our architects, for our engineers, for our landscape, for our built environment practitioners. So it's sort of maybe working backwards from projects and from concepts, and then see what policies incentivizes these sort of actions would be a good, perhaps a good approach.
Thank you, Hossein. Actually, that's a very good point. Actually, that links back to another question from our audience, which is on your drivers. And that question was, why do you select those drivers? Just to share the background, why do you select those drivers, and why is it how you prioritize them, and how do you derive how to measure them based on these drivers? Could you perhaps then, I think the question is more to ask, why those drivers? How do you prioritize them, and why do you think they are the most important ones? And are they universally applied across all your projects? If not, how do you identify or select which ones to use?
Well, some of those drivers are the obvious ones that we have all been working on. I'm sure the questioner has also sort of used that. Of course, question of carbon, that we are all having that to the point that we now, as Søren said, we are risking having that tunnel vision of carbon. So carbon and air quality is one. Water is, of course, it's a very important thing, not only in the context of Singapore, which is now of course, has been a strategic importance, but a lot of projections are that the next biggest future conflicts are going to be over water, not over oil or other things. Scarcity of water in a planet which is covered with 2/3 of it is water, is how we have practiced. Some of them are obvious: vegetation, biodiversity. They're very clear and obvious. Others we have developed. We are proposing them as ideas. And it is, of course, it is not finished. The work we continuously adding or perhaps subtracting or fusing 2 or 3 of them together into one other one. Some of them are architectural drivers, design drivers that are already taken into action in designs, like natural ventilation, voids, and other things. So it's a study, it's a work in progress, and for specific projects we try to, I think, something like 16, to select about 16 of them, because it becomes even, of course, more complex trying to account for more drivers. And those selections are partly subjective, depending on the practitioner. I might take a particular 16, and someone else might take maybe 12 of them would be with overlap. So it is subjective as well as objective, that some of them are highly numerically are important, sort of 6 or 7 of them perhaps apply to every project. And then qualitatively, we try to measure it without measuring it. Sometimes by measuring things, we destroy the concept. So we are trying to both measure and not measure. So we say qualitatively, it's a range of 1 to 5, start at 1 to 10, and then we reduce it to 1 to 5. There is narrative, on the example that I had on admiralty. For each of them, you can talk about things, write things down, and say, and then qualitatively rank them. It is a narrative.
So, Søren, do you have any thoughts about that? Because we also did have some conversations about how measurable is it, right? And how objective that can be. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think one thing I would point out is, I think it's and which we haven't maybe discussed so much yet, is that it is really dependent on where you are, because I think defining these criteria for the western part of the world they will probably look different in Africa or in South America. I was in COP28. I was in a panel discussion with a very bright lady from Kenya, and we discussed these things, and it was just very easy to see we were coming from two different angles to this. Of course, she was talking about affordable housing and just a lot of other things, which was made perfectly sense also around regenerative design, but just another angle into this. So I think we need to address that kind of local context. I think also Hossein alluded a little bit to that water is very important for Singapore. Could be that it is many places, but slightly different. And then your question about how measurable it is. I think it is quite subjective still, I would say. But I think by just discussing these 16 different parameters, I think you get a perspective of your project, and you will definitely not overlook something you shouldn't overlook in a way. So you will get together with the client and the stakeholders around. I think you will get in the right direction. That's the most important part of it.
That's a good point. It's very interesting that you have also mentioned about the social aspects, like the person you met at COP from Kenya, and how you spoke about social housing. And actually, we have just one question that came in just a few minutes ago, and Michelle is asking, in what way would regenerative development help in social inequality matters? I'm not sure how we want to answer this, because we have spoken about nature being a client, nature being a key stakeholder, but now we're talking about the community as well. And also the community and the people are also the groups that we have not spoken a lot about. We spoke about carbon and water and all the hard infrastructure. But when we talk about the software and the people, being people-centric and nature-centric, they are also a key stakeholder. So what are your thoughts about how regenerative development can help them solve some of their problems? Is it health issues? Is it aging issues? Any thoughts?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, it's extremely important for the local community, but it's extremely important for the global, community to solve this issue, that we think about this. Because why should people that cannot even afford a house or think about that we should save carbon and we should do all these things? They have some other needs before that. So if you want to be together on this journey, and that goes for the big scale but also for a city level, we really need to think about equality and create societies where we are in common about things. So I think it's extremely important to have in mind. That's why it is very important to get early in and have the planning right. So you plan the city area so people can afford to live there.
It's true. And Hossein, what do you think? How does this translate to regenerative design ideas and principles?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Michelle also goes on to ask about system thinking in architecture and how it ties in with larger ecosystem of city planning. And of course, in a short presentation, we couldn't touch up on all these things, but of course, complexity, embracing complexity is one aspect of being able to be regenerative design. It's a prerequisite. So is system thinking, seeing the connections between all these drivers is key. Without system thinking, we will not be able to be fully regenerative. So it's important to do that. And once we understand systems, then we know how to improve a system. And improving a system is the way we usually do it. We take the non-functioning item in a system, we take it out of the system, improve on it, and put it back in there. And it never works. It hasn't worked. All the graphs are showing that we have not been successful. So a true system thinker solves the problems of the components from within the system. Because as you alter a component, other components through the connectivities will change as well. So system thinking and understanding that is also important. And the whole thing is, once you're a system thinker, you understand things like the tragedy of the common. Tragedy of the common being that if you're in a group and you're doing something, some of you win, others lose if you're competing with one another. But if you're not competing systematically and in a proper manner, you all end up losing. The tragedy of the commons. So while some of us may be seen as if we are more affluent, we can afford to live here, the other guys can't afford to live here. But if we continue on this path with carbon, with seawater level rise, etc., and temperature rises, we find that we all end up in a situation which is not livable. So even though we've won, we end up losing. So it is understanding those concepts will help connect the various aspects of these drivers to the regenerative thinking.
That's a good point, Hossein. And actually, that brings me to my last question. And I've got my team here prompting me the last question. So if I could have the privilege of the last question. I think that's a very good point you made about optimizing the sub-optimization of certain systems and not optimizing the entire systems that we're talking about. But then again, in Singapore, we do know that each of our sector is doing their best to optimize each of the work that they do. And there are some good efforts like our Green Buildings project, ABC's water, biophilic frameworks that we have. All that has been good effort, and actually can be seen through the lens of a regenerative design. So that said, I'm wondering, with your experience having worked on some of the projects in Singapore, what do you think, in your opinion, Singapore has done right? And of course, what could be further improved to advance this concept that we're talking about and to advance and tackle our constraints? Can be candid about it.
You know better Singapore.
You want me to go first? And then,
you can go first, and I can.
Singapore has been an example, a good example for the rest of the world of how to look at things in long term. The 7th generation that Søren mentioned from the good ancestors. Of course, our 3 or 4 generations ago have been great ancestors for the 3 or 4 generations that are going to come. So we've done a lot of good things in Singapore. Quite a lot of them you mentioned, ABC water, the way we deal with our long-term planning, and dealing with nature, biodiversity, with green trees, etc., etc. So I won't talk about all the good things that we've done. We've done a lot, and quite a lot of us are fully aware of all those things. One thing that I suggest we can focus a little bit more on is on carbon. Ironically, while quite a lot of people are talking about focusing too much on carbon, tunnel vision. I think we can do a bit better on the carbon front, while focusing on carbon from within the system. And if you're thinking about making it more costly to be carbon intensive in projects, for instance, currently we'll be putting a carbon tax. The carbon tax really needs to be about 100 times more for it to be effective, for it to have the effect that we want to. Now, when it becomes 100 times more, it might cause other problems somewhere else in the system. So I'm not suggesting that tomorrow we should add it, multiply by 100, but it needs that level of disruptive approach to carbon that I think would be good for us at least to think about that.
Thank you, Hossein. Thank you. How about Søren? Would you like to take a stab at it?
Well, it's a little bit from a layman. I know Singapore very well now because I've been there many times, so it's a little bit seen from outside. I think you have done a lot of good things. The way you have greenery in the cities, and maybe in the beginning not so conscious about biodiversity. It was more having the green, parks and all these kind of things. I don't know how much you think about corridors. I actually asked Hossein before the session here, because that's what we found out with biodiversity. It's extremely important that these green areas are not in isolation. There is corridors, so species and things can travel between the different the different parks and areas. But maybe you to think about that, but that's something to think about when you have biodiversity. That is corridors. That's what we found out in Denmark, that we need corridors. But I also echo Hossein's view on carbon. I think some of the buildings you make just by looking at them seems quite heavy. So quite, big concrete columns, big. I mean, they if you really count the carbon in these buildings, embodied carbon, I think they will be well over what we do in Denmark, I must say. So when I think regulation on embodied carbon, you need to have that for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Hossein and Søren. Thank you so much for your insights and sharing with us your experiences and thoughts from across the world. I think this is a very good beginning for us to understand and begin this journey on talking about regenerative design and that mindset shift. As we say, it is not about a set of rules, it is a mindset shift. And we will be continuing this conversation tomorrow with our colleagues from the different sector. There'll be a multi-sectorial stakeholder engagement workshop tomorrow where we'll discuss more of this in detail. And we hope that the learnings that we have tomorrow and the insights, we will be able to share them at the World City Summit, where we'll see you again from June 2nd to 4th in Singapore. Yeah, thank you so much again for your time. I know it's very, very early where you are in Europe right now, so thank you so much for joining us. With that, I'll hand over to my colleague Deng Mao. Thank you. Over to you, Deng Mao.
Thank you, Elaine. We would like to thank Dr. Hossein and Søren again for your presentations, and Elaine for skillfully moderating the Q&A for some of the really tough questions to be discussed. And we hope everyone in our audience today have benefited with a deeper understanding of regenerative design and get a little more comfortable using it and trying to apply it in your respective works. So we hope you could subscribe to CLC's mailing list for future updates, and in particular, to join and support the World City Summit taking place in Singapore on 2nd to 4th June this year. We will hope to share some of the findings of this collaboration and also continue to learning and cross-sharing with international cities on their climate actions and ambitions at the Resilient and Regenerative Cities track. Yep. So as the lecture comes to a fruitful end, we would also like to give a preview to the next lecture we are organizing in early February towards a more inclusive Singapore, designing dementia-friendly neighborhoods, to be held on the 2nd of February. With CLC's recently launched dementia-friendly neighborhood study as a base, this lecture explores the objectives, processes, and findings of the study, and what it will continue to take as we work towards proliferating dementia-friendly neighborhoods across Singapore to create more inclusive homes for all. And last but not least, we would also like to seek your feedbacks via the QR code flashed on the screen, and would greatly appreciate if you could take a minute to help us improve the lecture series. With this, we have come to the end of the session. Thank you for taking the time and joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.